The real reason pro vocals slap isn't just talent, it's vocal mixing and production. I'm gonna let you in on the secrets I learned from major studios and big engineers so that you can get your vocals sounding professional for free. I'm about to show you how to make your vocals compete with your heroes and stand out from the crowd. This is part 2 of my vocal series, so if you don't know how to record and pre-process your vocals like a pro, then check out part 1 here first. And if you want to take your music to the next level, then my one-on-one coaching program might be a great fit for you. Just book a free discovery call down below to get started with that. Let's get on with the video. We're about to start mixing these vocals, so I've taken all of our plugins and effects off. I want to start dry and raw. That is not what she said. All mixing should be about solving a problem in front of you. If you're coming to this tutorial looking for me to give you like the exact settings you should use on your compressor or your EQ, then you're in the wrong place. That is like the dumbest approach you could possibly take to mixing. It is all dependent on the song. What you will get out of this, hopefully, is a good set of guidelines to use so that you can mix your own vocals or other people's vocals in a much more effective way and take your vocals from amateur to professional sounding consistently. That's what we're aiming for here. So let's get started. I usually like to start editing the vocals on the most important part of the song, which is the chorus usually.
Play rough just to get you back now. Up all night, there's no need to back down. No shame, what I know you're gonna say.
So what I usually like to start doing is a bit of EQ to cut out some muddiness and get some extra presence, help the vocals cut through a little bit more. So if we load up a Pro Q4, you're pretty safe cutting off a little bit of the low end. You can hear that's just tightening things up a little bit. Now this is a great time to check everything. I've soloed this out and noticed there's a little bit of sibilance artifact here, so we are going to whack on a gain envelope and turn that down so before it hits the EQ it's going to sound a lot better.
No shame, what?
And with the first EQ I'm really just looking to do subtractive EQ before I compress, and then we'll add another EQ later to do any boosts we might want to do, because if we boost into a compressor it's just going to be pushed down more. Let's dial in some of this EQ.
Play rough just to get you back now. Up all night, there's no need to back down. No shame, what? Oh, I know you.
With this, I'm just like looking for some resonances. If there's anything imperfect in my room, I'm just sweeping around with a pretty high Q, and if I hear anything bad, I might notch it out.
Whoa. Oh, I know you're gonna say to get you back now. Up all night, there's no need to back down. No shame.
So we've got a few notches coming out here. Nothing crazy. This is really just kind of a bit of housekeeping following on from our vocal pre-processing. Now we've got that, we can focus on getting the vocal to really punch through and sound great. How do we do that? With some compression. Now a lot of people like to de-ess before they compressor as well, but we've already done the de-essing on the audio track itself, so we don't have to worry too much about that. I recommend avoiding mixing vocals in solo where you can. I did that EQ in solo just because I was specifically looking for resonances, but for everything else, I like to mix it with everything playing because you just really hear where the vocal sits in the mix a lot more easily. My usual starting point for compression is honestly Slate Digital's virtual mix rack, because it has a bunch of compressor models and I know them really well, but you can literally use whatever you want. There's a ton of free compressors that are going to do just as good a job, so don't worry about replicating my exact plugins. These are just what I've used for ages and what work well for me, but you can use a ton of different plugins to get to the same result. So these are just really for you to understand the principles and guidelines of how to mix vocals effectively. What I like to usually start with, not every time, is a 1176 style compressor doing a very fast attack and the fastest possible release. I usually have the attack at around 6 and then I just dial that into taste. So let's do that.
I know you're gonna say, come back and pull me closer. I push you away so slow, 'cause we know this never works.
So adding up to 10 dB of compression on lead vocals in one instance is a really good way to slam your compressor, and if it's a characterful compressor like the 1176, you can get some great vibe, bite, and it'll really jump out of the mix at you. Now we're going to play with the attack and release times.
Up all night, there's no need to back down. No shame, what? Oh, I know.
Now with the attack time of an 1176, you can really run through it, and at a certain point the vocal will start really popping out of the mix at you. So that's how I like to dial in the attack on the 1176. Let's do that.
Come back and pull me closer. I push you away so slow, 'cause we know this never works, but somehow it's never over.
My next usual port of call is to go for an 1176 style compressor because they sound great and they're also really easy to dial in.
There's no need to back down, no shame. Oh, I know you're gonna say, come back and
Let's try this without plugins.
push you away so slow, 'cause we know this never works, but somehow it's never over.
You'll notice these plugins are adding a lot of gain for me. That is something to be careful with. If you don't know a plugin well, it's really advisable to try and match the gain. There's a very cheap plugin that you can use which is called Gain Match. And if we instantiate that, we put one up here, we put one down below, and we will get, if we put it on auto, it will level out the gain that we're adding with our plugins.
Get your back now, up all night, there's no need to back down, no shame.
So I kept experimenting with these compressor settings and actually ended up dialing this back just a little bit. See, I've gone for more like a 5 dB. I think it was just a bit too pinned at the 10 dB level. Sucking the life out of a little bit. That is something you have to be careful with when you're over compressing.
Come back and pull me closer.
I think that sounds a lot more natural. And I also dialed that attack back to 5. With that lower level of compression, it actually pops out much more when you go back on the attack a little bit to about 5 to the high 4s. So when you change one compressor setting, make sure you're experimenting with your other settings to ensure that everything's working together, because each part is dependent on the other parts. So now we've got those two basic parts down. Our compression and EQ is kind of in the right ballpark. It's sounding how we want it to sound. So now we've got that, we can get into a bit more of the sauce, which is going to make those vocals go from amateur to professional real fast. So next, I just like to get a de-esser on there, doing a little bit just to smooth things out a little bit more after the compressor.
I push you away so slow, 'cause we know this never works.
So now we've got the de-esser. I love to do some additive EQ, and for me, I love the UAD Pultec. I think it adds so much to a vocal. Not everyone likes this, but any characterful EQ will do a job. I like to tend to bump up the low frequency to about 100 and then play with the boost and attenuation.
Play rough just to get you back now, up all night, there's no need to back down, no shame. Whoa, oh, I know you're gonna say, come back and pull me closer. I push you.
Now let's dial in the top end.
You're gonna say, come back and pull me closer.
I think I'm feeling that 4K range really well.
So slow, 'cause we know this never works.
Now another nice thing to do is add a bit of cut through and fizz. Sometimes fresh air is nice for this. It's like kind of like a harmonic exciter. This is actually a free plugin, so go download that if you want. Let's see if that works.
Push you away so slow, 'cause we know this never works, but somehow it's never over. Play rough just to get you back now.
It's adding a really nice bit of thickness to the middle of the vocal. And when you're experimenting with these plugins, it's really just about experimentation. Like, I'll use fresh air on maybe like half the vocals I do. Some I'll use decapitator on. Some I'll use something else on. There's only a few plugins that I really use on every single vocal. That's because I just know they work every single time, and we're about to get to one of those in a second. There's a ton of applications for this, but Soothe is basically a dynamic resonance suppressor. That means it just takes out resonances based on their frequency. So it really helps soothe everything and just make everything smoother. And this is so perfect on vocals, because with vocals, they need to cut through the mix as much as possible. You need to crank them up and have them really loud, really compressed in your face. So you're bringing up a lot of the nastiness at the same time. And Soothe is great for just ironing that out.
Play rough just to get you back now, up all night, there's no need.
So the higher the band is, like the more resonance suppression we're doing. This depth is like how big the cut is.
Come back and pull me close.
And then sharpness is kind of like how sharp each little notch is, like how high the Q value is, kind of.
This never works, but somehow it's never over. Play rough just to get you back now, up all night, there's no need to back down, no shame. Whoa.
So I particularly like this preset, which is called the Voice of God, developed by Jason Joshua. It just adds some crazy smoothness. Let's hear that bypassed.
but somehow it's never over. Play rough,
And
get
on.
you back now, up all night.
You can just hear that crazy cut through.
No shame, whoa, oh,
So most of my kind of goal when I'm processing vocals like this is to get the right level of in-your-faceness alongside a smoothness that lets the vocals cut through but not get harsh on the ear. So another plugin I like to use to do that with is Ozone Vintage Tape, which is lovely plugin. I like to set it on this 7.5 IPS and just mess around with the bias.
no shame, whoa, oh, I know you're gonna say, come back and pull me closer. I push you away so slow, cause we know this never works, but somehow it's never over. Play rough just to get you back now, up all night, there's no need to back down.
We've touched a little bit on the money plugins. We've added that Pultec, we've added Fresh Air, and we've done an incredible amount of smoothing with mainly Soothe and a little bit with Ozone Vintage. But to get increased cut through, we need to add some harmonics and saturation. Fresh Air does a little bit of that, but there's another plugin I like to turn to, which is amazing for adding even more cut through and really dialing in the right amount of saturation for a vocal. So there's a ton of different stuff you can use. I often use Decapitator as well, but right now, at the minute, I'm loving this newfangled Saturate, which I think we'll put it before the smoothing plugins, in fact, because that'll just work a little bit better. But let's try this out.
Play rough just to get you back now, up all night, there's no need to back down. No shame, whoa,
Let's just set the gain to auto.
gonna say, come back.
Soloed this out just so you guys can hear what it's doing. It's bypassed right now.
Play rough just to get you back now.
And then we'll engage it.
Play rough just to get you back now.
And hear that just cutting through, and that's with the automatic gain, so there's no gain getting added there. So with the saturation plugins, they're really just useful for adding that extra bit of cut through, that extra bit of thickness and body. Doesn't really matter what you use, but I recommend just dialing it in and don't really go overboard with it. It's something you really want to feel, but not necessarily hear super clearly unless you're going for that clearly distorted effect, in which case I'd put like Devil Lock or something crazy on there instead. So if we go with no plugins,
Play rough just to get you back now.
to plugins,
There's no need to back down. No shame, whoa, oh, I know you're gonna say.
also, I just want to show you guys another saturation thing that I often do instead of saturate as well.
Play rough just to get you back now, up all night, there's no need to back down.
Which is
no shame, whoa, oh, I
very
know
useful because it has a
you're
mix
gonna
knob.
say, come back and pull me closer. I push you away so slow, cause we know this never works, but somehow it's never over.
So it's often good just to load up a few different saturation plugins and see what works for an individual song. So let's compare Decapitator to Saturate here.
Play rough just to get you back now, up all night, there's no need to back down. No
Now, I
shame.
said mixing is all about solving problems. I wanted to run through the reason for putting on each plugin because it's way too easy to get into the way of following like a blind formula and just be like, oh, I do this, then this, then this, then this. But really, although there's some general guidelines, you want to be doing things on a kind of more individual basis. So the purpose of my Pro Q is just to cut out a bit of low end and just notch out any resonances that come from me having a non-optimal room where I recorded my vocals in. So that's the reason for that. You don't have to do that all the time. It's not going to make a huge difference, but it is a nice helpful thing to do, especially if you record just through your interface preamps where they don't have like a low cut filter or anything like my preamp does. Then compression wise, this is one where you can use as much or little compression as you want, but it does tend to be that if you're doing a modern vocal style, compression is just the style of modern genres. So if you don't use compression, it will sound out of place, which is a weird reason because you're not necessarily solving a mix problem. But the way modern music's gone with a ton of compression on everything to make everything as loud as possible, that's kind of the ballpark that you're playing in. I think the de-esser is pretty obvious why we used it, to get rid of the S's. But after the de-esser, we got onto plugins that are a lot more subjective as to why we'd use them. This is kind of something you have to learn for yourself by experimenting a lot. Like I've tried a ton of different character EQs, but I just found that the Pultec was one I kept coming back to because I think it adds a lot of magic in the low end. It's really nice to just do that boost and cut at the same time. Sounds amazing. Fresh Air again is something I've just experimented with over time, and I just found that it often gives a nice little boost to the mid-range. However, I definitely don't use it on every vocal because sometimes it's just not the right thing to use. But for here, I just thought vocal, I trusted my ears, I was thinking, let's try it out. If it didn't work, I would have taken it straight off. The only one I would say I find myself using on virtually every vocal is honestly Soothe, because it's such a great plugin. This Voice of God preset is unbelievable. This works on, I would say, 99.9% of vocals. And there's a ton of other tricks you can also do with Soothe, which I will get to in the next video, using it as a sidechain to suppress resonance in your backing vocals, but that's a whole other thing we'll get into. That is a crazy application for this plugin. So useful on that front. And then with the vintage tape and the saturation, these are really subjective. With the vintage tape, I often do find it adds something nice to a vocal. It helps smooth it out, like I said, and smoothing is really important for modern vocals due to the fact that everything's going to have to sound so slammed to compete with modern mixes. Then when it comes to your choice of saturation plugin, it's really up to you. Sometimes I use Devil Lock on a really low mix, sometimes I use Decapitator, sometimes I use Saturate, sometimes I use Satin. There's 4 or 5 that are my go-tos, and I'll just cycle through them until I get something good. I don't saturate every vocal, but I do saturate most of them because it really does make it easier to just place a vocal in a mix, and especially on my voice, it just thickens it up nicely. So now we've got those down, I think we can dive into effects processing. And this is where you can have some of the most fun with vocals, I think. This is a great place to add depth, texture, and space. So when it comes to vocal effects, there's a ton of stuff you can use. A bit of chorus, reverb, delay, phasing, flanging, heavy distortion, but the main bread and butter effects are reverb and delay. So let's go into some best practices on choosing delays and reverbs for your vocals. What I recommend you do is when you set up your vocal chain, like I have it set to auto-create these 3 plugins, and I use those as a jumping off point. So I go 1 vocal plate, 1 vocal hall, and 1 vocal delay. Usually I'll swap out 1, 2, or even all of these for other plugins later down the line, but this gets me to a great starting point where I can assess what I'm doing. So let's start by just sending a little bit of this over to our vocal plate, and you can hear what that sounds like.
Play rough just to get you back now. Up all night, there's no need to back down. No shame.
It's not doing that much.
I know you're gonna say,
but it just adds that little sense of space that does elevate the vocal up another notch. One thing I've missed over is that I'm doing all of this on send, so I never instantiate any plugins for reverb or delay on my main lead vocal track, because it just gives you so much more flexibility to create an aux send and then send over to that. So you can affect the level, you can use different plugins on the send and stack up those effects separately to create a really nice cohesive whole. So in terms of what this reverb is actually doing, just a simple 1.55 second plate. I've tweaked the equalizer to cut out some bits and bobs, but I'm actually thinking in this particular mix, it's still a bit busy and I might need to cut out some more stuff.
Play rough just to get you back now.
So I think we'll create an EQ on here.
No need to back down. No shame. Oh, I know you
and have that cutting out a little bit more of the low end.
Come back and pull me closer. I push you away so slow, 'cause we know this.
Let's try getting over to the hall as well.
But somehow it's never over.
So you can see that's doing a lot more obvious of an effect.
Get you back now. Up all night, there's no need to back down. No shame. Whoa. Oh, I know you're gonna say.
You can see the hall here is significantly longer.
Closer. I push you away so slow, 'cause
we're going to cut out some of the high end of that as well.
Works. But somehow it's never over. Play rough just to get you back now. Up all night, there's no need to back down. No shame. Whoa. Oh, I know you're gonna say.
Another thing I love to do personally with my vocal sends is create a spaced out track, which I can put spaced out on, which is a reverb and delay combination plugin. I find I can get some incredibly cool vocal effects using this plugin. So let's try that. We'll disable our other sends and send some audio over to here. First off, when you're using a send, just put the mix up to 100% wet, because you're sending only a small part of the audio, so you don't want to dilute it even further. And then we can play around with how we want this to sound.
Play rough just to get you back now. Up all night, there's no need to back down. No shame.
One thing I really like about this plugin is it has a ducker. So when the audio is playing, you can reduce the strength of the effect.
Play rough just to...
Doing a ping pong effect. And then in terms of the reverb, we can clean this up a little bit as well. Add a little bit of pre-delay so it's not happening straight away.
Play rough just to get you back now. Up all night, there's no need to back down. No shame. Whoa. Oh, I know you're gonna say.
Ooh, that's sounding nice. Maybe we can instantiate our other vocal reverbs as well.
Come back and pull me closer. I push
but
you
maybe a little bit lower.
We know this never works. but somehow it's never over.
So here, we're kind of stacking effects. I've got spaced out with the ducker so that in the spaces there's something to just fill the energy, but I'm still using my original reverb sends to give a little bit of ambience to the whole thing no matter what's happening. And we're going to do the same thing with our default delay and have a little bit of that in action even when the other stuff is playing.
No shame, whoa, oh, I know you're gonna say, come back and pull me closer. I push you away so slow.
Another send I love to create sometimes is a micro shift send, and we can use this to spread the lead vocal across our sort of stereo field a little bit and create a bit more additional depth to what we already have. So let's try this. Micro shift. I like to use this preset called lead vocal clarity sometimes, and we'll just send a little bit of our audio over to there. As you can see, it's really about making like small incremental improvements, which overall are going to give you that great pro sound that you're actually after.
Play rough just to get you back now. Up all night, there's no need to back down. No shame, whoa, oh, I know you're gonna say.
So if we take a listen to what our vocals sound like with our effects.
Play rough just to get you back now. Up all night, there's no need to back down. No shame, whoa, oh, I know you're gonna say.
You can see it creates a huge difference in just the feeling you get when you listen to that vocal. So far we've covered how to use effects as sends, which are playing throughout the whole vocal part. But one really cool thing you can do is use specific vocal effects to create these unique moments that just happen 1 or 2 times throughout a track. So let's go into how you can create some of those. So to create these unique moments, let's say we have this back down in the chorus, and we want to make this ring out and sort of fill this little space we've got here with something really cool. So let's see how we could do that. First thing I like to do is copy this down to its own unique track, and this is where I will be putting the plugins on the track and 100% wet, because that's how we're going to fill the space. So maybe we can go for like a distorted ringing out delay kind of thing. So to do that, maybe we'll put on some Devil Lock, crush this up.
Back down. Back down.
That's sounding pretty crazy. And then we can get a delay on there. Now we just want this playing in the space, so that's why we're going to put the mix to 100%, because then the original vocal won't play at all.
Back down, no.
Now let's choose like a different model, maybe a analog chorus.
Back down, no.
And if we put this into a big old reverb potentially.
Back down, no.
And now another thing I sometimes like to do is put a little sort of phone kind of style filter on it.
Back down, no shit.
Creates a really cool effect. Now once you've done that, I recommend bouncing that out to audio, because when you do this, you'll get the reverb tail to control and make sure it's not clashing with the other vocals you have. So this is going to overlap, but what I'm going to do is just turn it down really heavily.
Back down, no.
And then we can actually have that maybe with some chorus on it to spread it out wide and give a bit of a different feel.
Back down, no shame, whoa.
And there you have it. That's just a unique little moment we created that can play in the track, and super simple and easy to do. There is tons of ways. I recommend to come up with ideas on how to create these unique parts on your own. I really recommend just playing around, stacking up a load of effects. You can use like pitch shifters, EQs, distortion, any sort of ambient thing, granular effect. But it's honestly really just about experimentation, having fun, being free with it. And you can come up with all of these cool little moments throughout a song. They're kind of like Easter eggs for you to kind of discover and for your listeners to discover as the song plays. So we've grabbed this Never Works, and we're going to do a similar thing to what we just did, but with a granular effect. Maybe a portal often works well. And here it's just about finding something really cool. That's very cool. Then we throw that into another reverb or into a crystallizer, which I've accidentally pulled up. Look, this is the experimentation. Let's just go with this and see how it sounds.
Never works, but somehow it's never.
I mean, that just sounds cool as it is. And then we get the reverb on top. I mean, that's insanely cool. One thing I like to do with these is sometimes make them pitch down over time. So let's get like a little altar boy and then pitch the formant down. That's cool, but maybe it just needs to be pitched down like a little bit over time. Like we'll go over to here and just go down to like -3. And then something I like to do often as well is just to use a LFO tool to like make it sort of breathe up and down as well. And there we've got an insanely cool little vocal texture again to fill in that space.
We know this never works, but somehow it's never over.
And we can make it duck here as well, so it doesn't come in until it's ready.
Never works, but somehow it's never over.
So just play around with those and have as much fun as you can, just creating all these weird and wonderful effects. That adds so much to your vocal mixing skill set. So that's how you can transform your vocals from amateur to pro sounding in minutes. If you want to go way deeper on this topic and every other topic on music production and really take your music production skills to the next level, I have a couple of new spots opening in my one-on-one coaching program. So just book a free discovery call down below to see if you would be a good fit for the program. With that said, let's take a listen to our before and after, what we started with before we mix these vocals to what we've got now, and then I will see you in part 3 of this, which is how to add doubles, harmonies, and crazy vocal choirs to your own vocals to take that final step from amateur to pro sounding vocals. Let's do it together in the next one. Peace. Love you guys.
No, walking when I know I should run, holding my heart just the one. I'd be better never knowing you. You know just how to get to me whenever I get up to leave. You know just how to tease me, how to make me play rough just to get you back now. Up all night, there's no need to back down. No shame, what I know you're gonna say.
Oh, it sounds so much better. All right, see you in the next one, guys.